So Matt Walsh posted this video as a big win for him. And it's really easy to frame something as a win when you're in a entirely friendly space and someone who doesn't have your media background, who isn't a keynote speaker at the Young America's Foundation event in New Mexico, decides, hey, I'm going to challenge you on your hateful views. And for my money, I think this audience member did a really great job debating Matt Walsh on his anti-trans hatred. In the video, the tweet where Matt Walsh sent this out, he of course misgenders this trans woman. Just the hatred keeps ramping up on a daily basis as the cash keeps pouring in. But here's this interaction where, again, keep in mind that the crowd is very much primed to be on Matt Walsh's side. This is a conservative event, and yet he still, I think, struggled to define a woman to this trans woman who has a medical background.
How would you define a woman? Because you've asked other people up here to define how we would define a woman. How would you define a woman, Mr. Walsh?
An adult human female.
All right, can you pause it? So that would be my definition of a woman. That would be my definition of a woman, right? Because female, she identifies as female. Trans people identify as female. If you're talking about the biological sex for when people are born, that's a gray area. I mean, around 1% to 2% of the population is born with intersex traits, and I know they get into this in a sec, but like they naturalize the simplicity of it, and he doesn't really have a good kind. Well, I should just let him go. But they pretend like there's some static definition, and they don't really have one at the top of their heads.
How would you define a woman? Because you've asked other people up here to define how we would define a woman. How would you define a woman, Mr. Walsh?
An adult human female.
And how doesn't a transgender woman fit that definition?
Female.
Because they're not female. They have. You said that you are a biological male, correct?
I said I'm transgender. I might be intersex for all we know. About almost as many people in the world are transgender as intersex, and a lot of people don't know.
Well, but that's a different conversation. Intersex, that's a genetic anomaly, that's a medical condition. So that's a completely different conversation. That's also not a third gender. That's a genetic anomaly that occurs within the sex binary of male and female.
Hold on. I'm sorry. If it's a binary, then intersex people cannot exist. If it's a binary, then intersex people cannot exist. So just that immediate question just deconstructs his entire black and white framing of this. As I said earlier, again, 1% to 2% of the population born with intersex traits. Amnesty International, I got that stat from them. It was like 1.7% they had it at, and it's comparable to the number of people born with red hair. Redheaded people don't exist, according to Matt Walsh.
I mean, I just find his inherent definition of like a woman to be unserious. And like, that's a new type of trolling that his fans do online, where if you like defend trans women, they go like, what is a woman? Define a woman, because they think that you can't do it because they have this definition in their head, not really understanding that like every word he said there is just a social construct that requires more explanation. Like, what is an adult? How would you define that? We know Matt Walsh has a tendency to define 16-year-old as the adult age, and I'm sure some of his fans might define even younger as adult age. What's a human? Can you give me a real definition of human? That's not just like what we are. Like, what is a female, and define it not from like the opposition to male characteristics. This is the kind of like pseudo intellectualism that like is really popular on the right, because it relies on everyone you're talking to having the same bigotries as you are, so you never have to explain anything.
Yeah.
We never have to get into the nitty gritty of the fact that all these definitions have changed over the course of human history. They've changed recently. They don't exist as static things across various cultures that exist within the United States, much less globally. Like certain people still celebrate cultural traditions like bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras that are theoretically cultural transitions from from childhood to adulthood. You know, it's all very like lazy and silly, and you can see the kind of people who it attracts, people who just want to be bigots but have the little air of like, I'm not a religious bigot entirely, I still like engage in some sort of scientific rigor. It'd be better if he was just like, you know, God never said you could be trans.
Right. Well, but that's what his argument boils down to. I mean, it's not an anomaly. Again, as much as red-headed people are an anomaly, intersex people are an anomaly, and that makes them to the tune of millions of people on this planet. And so that does not constitute an anomaly. If his construction is that it's black or white, it's male or female, it's A or B. But then sometimes there's an anomaly, and that's still millions of people. But I'm not going to contend with that because that does not fit into my A and B binary.
Exactly. But you know, because you're using an A and B binary, you create the existence of intersex people in a more like academic sense. Because if you didn't create this binary, if everything was a spectrum, you know, not to say that throughout human history there haven't always been characterizations of gender based on sexual characteristics, but this binary specifically creates something unique where like if someone doesn't fit within one category, they have to fit within another. Like, you know, drawing on some academic definitions of women, they're entirely based on, you know, rather we base what we define, and a lot of people still base on what they define as a woman as just the absence of male traits, you know, whether those be physical male traits or, you know, what they can attach psychological physiological traits to being a man. And, you know, for people like that, the breakdown of what constitutes a woman is also a direct assault on what constitutes a man, because they don't know how to define themselves if it's not in opposition to what these things, you know, what they might see in another person. And I think that's really where we see, you know, along with just the obvious grift, people like Matt Walsh who are inherently, you know, or rather people who follow Matt Walsh who seem like they are inherently insecure about their own gender and what it would mean for there to be trans people, for their own sexuality. They just, you know, they're just more comfortable living in a world where everything is defined by like what they are and what they are not, as opposed to any sort of like proactive.
The safe haven of fundamentalism.
Yeah, you know, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
No, I loved it. All right, let's, I'm sorry for interrupting this so much. I just saw this and I was like seething about Matt Walsh this morning, so I had to get some of it out there.
So that's a completely different conversation. That's also not a third gender. That's a genetic anomaly that occurs within the sex binary of male and female. What you're saying is that a quote unquote trans woman is a female?
By the definitions I'm familiar with, yes.
So how would you define female?
Through my training in healthcare, there are several different categories for how we define sex. People bring up chromosomes. People also bring up hormone levels. People bring up all sorts of other categories. Lots of people don't fit neatly into a gender binary, even people we don't consider to be intersex. It's a complicated spectrum.
But I didn't learn that in high school.
It's not complicated, but you also didn't define. So what is a woman? What is a female? What do these words mean?
It's complicated, and I know you're not going to like that answer, but that's
he didn't define it. He didn't define it. He said a woman is a female. So you define it then, dude, because we learned this, as you say, in high school, that intersex people, there's different categories of them based on their not hormonal, but chromosomal complexion. And then you also have the hormonal element as well. Like the reason it's a spectrum is because there are a variety of different categories, and where you fall into that biologically is where you determine your place on that spectrum. And some people don't fit into either kind of pole, and then they're non-binary. It's not that hard to define.
Well, I don't
like the reason he wanted her when they got to the point where she says how, you know, when she's talking about the definition of female, he clearly wants her to say, you know, how the most basic, I guess, definition of female would be the sex that bears young or produces eggs. But we all know that there are biological females who cannot do that, and they are born that way. And does that mean that they are not female? And if it does not mean that they are not female, then why would you not just categorize transgender women within that same group of females who just for medical reasons cannot bear children or produce eggs? I mean, they try to talk this transgender woman into Walsh tries to talk her into circles. He's obviously media trained. He knows what he's doing. And she's not, obviously, and she's just speaking from the heart. So on the level of how they're going to look, and he knows this, how they're going to look in this exchange, he's going to come off more calm, cool, and collected. But if you actually listen to the content that they're saying, Walsh isn't saying anything. Right. Because he's putting it all on her, and she sees where he's taking her, but she doesn't have the ability, I guess, because again, she doesn't have the same media experience as he does, to understand how to deal with what he's saying. But it's pretty simple how I just laid it out. The definition of female, how they would, if just that definition with no additional addendums, it would delete large swaths of biologically born females from identifying as female, because you would consider them not female by the fact that they just couldn't have children.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
You also didn't define. So what is a woman? What is a female? What do these words mean?
It's complicated, and I know you're not going to like that answer, but that's because there are no simple answers in human biology.
Let me ask you a question.
You guys,
Can I ask you one last
hang
question?
on. Just let me finish. You guys like to bring up high school level biology classes a lot. I get that a lot. But people who go on to more complicated biology classes will talk about sex as a spectrum.
It's not. It's not.
Well, biological researchers would disagree with you.
Well, then they're full of shit, the ones that would say that. There are...
Great argument.
There are male gametes and female gametes. Oh, I had one last question.
No, explain.
I just had one quick. Can you come back for 1 second? Because this is an important question. You said you're an EMT.
Yes.
Okay, if you're responding to a health emergency. Biological male, somebody with a penis, is having a medical emergency, and they say to you, "I think I'm having a miscarriage." Would you check them to see if they're having a miscarriage? Would you consider that a possibility for them?
Look. No, but that's because some people don't have body parts. Doesn't mean they're not a woman.
Okay. Sounds like we've established there are some people who, in principle, can get pregnant, and there are some people who can't. So there's two categories, otherwise known as binary.
All right, I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm back to pausing it because this fits perfectly into what you were saying, Binder. He's now saying that female is defined by the capacity to bear children. I mean, and that fits in with how he kind of conceives of women, right? I mean, that's their only real value to society. So what is a woman? If she can produce eggs and she can have children, that means that, hey, you're a woman that's gone through menopause. You're not a woman. You're not a woman anymore by Matt Walsh's definition. And the fact that he uses this fake hypothetical scenario of a trans woman who has a penis saying that I'm having a miscarriage and having that woman respond to the hypothetical, which probably would never happen, and then saying, my point is proven, just shows how weak his entire argument and belief system really is.
Well, he started going in on gametes, but then he realized that wasn't going to play to the crowd, and he got a sort of a better logic trap. But I mean, you know, right wingers love to flip back and forth between like pretending like they're doing science and then just like quoting the Bible at you, like that's a form of doing science. And this is more or less what that is, because whether or not this lady can answer the question concretely is, like she said, due to the fact that once you get out of high school level science, you understand that things are a little bit more complicated than the binaries you learn in high school. And maybe that's just, you know, you hate to say it, maybe we should reevaluate how we teach high school level science, because people get into like the adulthood and then they have to rather come to terms with the fact that they don't even understand how gravity works usually, you know. And then because you see this, especially as somebody who like listens to a lot of flat earther stuff, you see people get into arguments with flat earthers insistent that they understand the way the earth actually works, even though they haven't taken a science class since high school, much like Matt Walsh does. But, you know, on the flip side, if you spend all your time thinking about this stuff as opposed to like, you know, operating from the standpoint of like, yeah, I understand people are allowed to self-define gender. They're allowed to, you know, biology is a spectrum that, you know, manifests as hormonal levels, as chromosome manifestations, a lot of biological traits, secondary biological, sexual biological traits. Then you don't find yourself like constructing arguments against Matt Walsh in your head all day. But Matt Walsh just spends all day like trying to delegitimize trans people. So you kind of have to go into that argument with a lot more information than you'd expect, because he's just operating from the same standpoint as like a flat earther who spends all their time trying to disabuse people of like myths about the earth being round in his head. And so like, I don't know what he is trying to prove, but she's right. Like biologists just simply don't agree that sex is a spectrum anymore. Yeah. The last time they did was when your high school curriculum was being written. And since we don't do a good job of updating that stuff, and it's just not true, you know.
This ultimately is the equivalent of the right wings. Like, what would you do if you had to torture somebody and you had 24 hours to figure out where a bomb was going to happen and it was going to blow up the entire island of Manhattan? And then they just made that into a show with Kiefer Sutherland.
Well, first I'd say the N-word.
Yeah, there we go.
Just in case it like solved the situation.
I mean, honestly, that might be the nuclear code.
Yeah, but you know, as a conspiracy theorist of the type that Matt Walsh is, he relies on the general ignorance of our society around like scientific facts and like, you know, how they manifest in real life.
Yeah, and
also, I want to. It's such a ridiculous, that last example, that last like thought experiment he threw to that woman. It was so ridiculous, but I do want to address it. How would an EMT, unless the person was lying on the floor nude, how would this person know that this individual had a penis? Or is Matt Walsh just really trying to say, if you come to someone who's experiencing a medical emergency and they're a big burly man with a beard and they say they're possibly having a miscarriage, what would you think? And the answer is really simple. They could very well be having a miscarriage because they could be a trans man who has all their reproductive organs still intact, because trans men still do and can get pregnant. I mean, so yeah, it would be a completely, if they told you that, you would have to see if that was a possibility that was occurring. I mean, even his logic is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there is medical and scientific value to this kind of language about person with a uterus, person with a penis, etc. And we'll keep going, but I do just, it really puts like the fire in me, this kind of rage when I see this brave woman in this crowd of so much hatred. She really is, in my opinion, doing a really great job holding her own, knowing that you're in this crowd that hates you and is so actively hostile towards you, and speaking to somebody who has a major platform.
Who in principle can get pregnant, and there are some people who can't. So there's two categories, otherwise known as binary.
Lots of women can't get pregnant either.
There you go.
Yeah, but they're still of the nature to get pregnant. The only reason
they can't get pregnant.
Yes, but
truth matters, right?
It does. That's what I'm trying to explain to you.
Truth matters, and they can't get pregnant. That's the truth. So how are they still women?
Because they are for the same reason that I can rightly say that human beings have two legs. And if a person is born with only one leg, that doesn't call into question the statement that human beings have two legs, okay?
Yes,
a person being born with one leg doesn't mean that now legs are on a spectrum, and we can't say we can't say anything at all about how many legs a person has. Who knows? They could be a centipede. You know, they could have 100 legs. No, we know human beings have 2 legs. If a human is born without 2 legs, something went wrong. They were supposed to have that second leg. Something went wrong. If you meet a person on the street,
he's literally explaining how trans people define their existence, that they were born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Right.
Also, that's again, going back to the earlier part, that's a very poor definition of a human being, having that has 2 legs. I know that he's not saying that like that's the only category. I mean, the only way you would define a human as like a creature that has 2 legs, but like that defines a lot. Basically, every primate has 2 legs, and so if you were to give birth to an ape, like a gorilla, would that make it a human because it has 2 legs, or like does that make it still an ape? We are apes, but you know what I mean.
But doesn't that also kind of disprove? Doesn't this also sort of collapse his argument in the sense that he's sort of implying that like defining people's existence is much more layered and nuanced than just making sure that one clear term or one clear stipulation is the barometer for like defining what a person is?
It's what Bender said there too. I mean, he is conceding the point that there are people born, if he wants to call it a genetic anomaly for the purposes of his argument, go ahead. But the point is that there are lots of people that are born that don't fit into the binary, and so he's completely undercutting his argument here.
And even just from like the ableism discussion, like a lot of people don't fit into like, you know, being able, like a lot of people don't fit into the having the ability to walk properly.
But when he says something went wrong,
not need a ramp. Like,
right. But when he says something went wrong here, the point is like, okay, then what next? Even conceding all of the hateful kind of undertones of what he's saying about basically trans people being freaks is the undertone here. Then what happens? Like, then they get to define themselves as however they want. That's the point.
Well, it seems like, you know, he's working from the opinion that like God has like a model of human, you know, both man and woman. And then when you're put into the world, you're supposed to have certain characteristics because you're a human and man or woman. And if you don't have them, something went wrong. And that's just, again, not how we define people. We as a society have like a set of narrow constraints that, you know, we usually put people into, like whether they be man or woman. That depends on society, what those characteristics include. But, you know, generally speaking, we accept that people can be born outside of those narrow constraints without, you know, something having gone wrong. And like the way he means that like if you fall outside of this like norm that he has in his head for like a human being as per like Adam and Eve, then like something dramatic has happened that's wrong with you. And, you know, maybe in the past we would define stuff like that, you know, medical anomalies and stuff like that. But, you know, nowadays we have incorporated a lot more stuff into the norm than we used to. And, you know, maybe we will continue to do that.
Let's keep going.
Beings have 2 legs. If a human is born without 2 legs, something went wrong. They were supposed to have that second leg. Something went wrong. If you meet a person on the street who only has 1 leg, maybe they had an accident. Maybe they were in war. Maybe something, you know, maybe they were in a car accident. Maybe they had cancer. A leg was cut off. But you know that something went wrong because by their nature, they're supposed to have 2 legs.
Then they don't get to define as
a woman by her nature can get
human
pregnant.
anymore.
A man by his nature never can. So if you meet a woman of childbearing age, say she's 28 years old, and she can't get pregnant, you know automatically that something has gone wrong. And she can go to the doctor and find out what that thing is, even if they can't fix it. So that proves that women by their nature can get pregnant, because the simple fact that she can't shows you that there's something wrong. This is what is known as the exception that proves the rule. Whereas if a male with a penis can't get pregnant, no doctor on earth is going to run tests to see what's wrong with him, because they already know it's that he's a male, and there's only male and female, those who can get pregnant and those who can't. So that's it.
Now you might be it's a crazy person.
Wrong thing.
But wow, I mean, well done. I think she really held her own there. And I also just, again, if the person then who now only has 1 leg goes to the doctor and tries to get help, the doctor will help them, right? They will maybe get them some sort of crutch or artificial leg, trying to allow them to incorporate themselves into society and make things easier on them, which is the exact thing that gender affirming healthcare does.
I think you're always going to have a hard time not to, say you shouldn't, but you're just always going to have a hard time arguing with people whose definition of woman about, trans issues is like, well, women can have my baby. You're always going to have a hard time convincing them that there are other definitions of woman, because they treat that sort of woman can have my baby as the crutch of it. It's like, it's a
They're vessels
biological
for
thing.
my seed.
They're vessels for your seed, et cetera. Like a big albatross on like the Joe Rogan bro side is that like, well, I wouldn't want to have sex with a man. So like, that's my definition. And so, it's just hard to have a legitimate intellectual conversation about like hormone levels or like the manifestations of different biological traits or whatever with them, because they're just going to fall back onto like, well, in my head, we define women as, females who can have babies. And they might acknowledge that some females can't have babies, but they won't acknowledge that that definition is illegitimate.
Emma's powerful rat rival. Yes. Matt Walsh's ridiculous standards on gender and humanity feels like a very foisting a plucked chicken and going, behold, a man moment. I don't know what this references to. You guys keep making it. Diogenes. See, again, this is, I would not survive in the Tim Pool deontological kind of debate here. What? That's a philosopher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm bad at that.
I don't know the classics. It's, as part of my woke curriculum, we didn't read anything that was older than 1970 and written by a black person. And not written by a black person, I should say.
Live free and die says the only reason Matt Walsh gives a shit about the definition of a woman is because he wants to belittle and disregard the experience of transgendered people. Yes. Custodial artist. An EMT is trained to address any express medical issues and then transport them to the hospital if requested. An EMT is in the United States cannot diagnose any medical condition. If Walsh's case happened, it's up to the doctor to determine any problems and the EMT to transport with the best care. And no matter the gender, there isn't much an EMT can do for a miscarriage. Yeah.
Well, first, the EMT takes your pants off and determines whether you have a dick or not, and then then that determines your level of care in America.
That's how it works. Simone says, hi, I'm crew. I'm a transgender neuroendocrinologist, and I have been dealing with this kind of nonsense rhetoric like Matt Walsh since I came out. I wrote a Scientific American article actually going through the complicated biology underlying sex. Oh, all right, we'll check that out. Simone says, Fannin was correct, says cis women getting breast augmentation or BBLs is gender-affirming care. Elon Musk getting hair plugs is gender-affirming care. Yes. Cis men getting TRT is gender-affirming care. People are going to be so mad when they can no longer access these procedures due to anti-trans legislation. What is TRT?
Testosterone replacement therapy.
Okay, gotcha.
So like when you're in your 50s and they give you like injections so your T levels don't go so low and you don't get depression in your midlife crisis.
Yeah, okay.
But also they they give estrogen replacement therapy to women during menopause.
Yes.
Like we give exogenous androgen hormones to people all the time. Bodybuilders use estrogen in some instances for performance enhancing drugs because of its effect on insulin. It's just these people just aren't very familiar with the human body in any real sense other than like this gender binary thing that they've become very hyper focused on very recently. Because, for me, it just feels like race science all over again. You're not allowed to do race science anymore. You're not allowed to, the whole we're not going to bake a cake for any gay person who comes into my bakery is gone. The only person still holding that flag is Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin. This is the new, hatred of, I hate to say the month, because obviously it's been going on for a very long time. There's always been a current of it, but it allows them to pretend like they're a lot smarter than they are. Even though they're very, very far removed with the medical side of these things.